I found the receipt in her coat pocket on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic. No slow-motion scene or cinematic tension, just a simple crumpled piece of thermal paper. The date was from the same weekend Margaret had told me she was visiting her college roommate in Boston. The hotel name was the Grandview Resort and Spa. Room 412. 2 nights. The thing is, Margaret's college roommate lives in Vermont, not New Hampshire, and the Grandview Resort specializes in romantic getaways for couples. I'd never heard her mention this place before. My name is Victor Wells, and I'm 42 years old. I work in data analysis for a mid-size insurance firm in Connecticut. I drive a 7-year-old Honda Accord. I wear the same brand of jeans for the last 15 years, and I don't know if that's comforting or depressing. By every measurable standard, I am completely unremarkable. That's what Margaret always said she loved about me. You're my rock, Victor, my steady, dependable rock. Turns out rocks are easy to step on. I stood in our bedroom, holding that receipt in my fingers, feeling as though the paper itself could dissolve if I squeezed it too tightly. Margaret was downstairs, making dinner, humming a little tune to herself while she chopped vegetables. She moved with an energy I hadn't seen in a while, light and carefree, completely unaware of what I'd just uncovered. We'd been married for 12 years. 12 years of mortgage payments, grocery shopping, arguing over whether to get a dog. 12 years of me believing we were building something real, something that would last. I didn't confront her that night. That's the thing about betrayal. It comes like a whisper, not a shout. It lingers before you even know it's there. I folded the receipt carefully and placed it back exactly where I found it. Then I went downstairs, sat at the table, and ate the pasta she'd made. I complimented the sauce, helped her load the dishwasher. She kissed my cheek and said I seemed distracted. I told her I was just tired from work. But I wasn't tired. I was awake, so wide awake that I could feel every inch of my world begin to collapse. The next morning, I started digging. Margaret Wells, née Harrison, was a public relations consultant. She worked for a boutique firm in Hartford that specialized in corporate crisis management and reputation repair. Ironic, considering what was about to happen. She made more money than I did, drove a new car, wore expensive clothes that she bought during her quarterly shopping trips to New York. I never minded. In fact, I was proud of her success. She had ambition. She was going places. I was proud of her, but I was also blind. I accessed our phone records first. We had a family plan, so it was easy. I downloaded 3 months of call logs and text message metadata. No content, just numbers and timestamps. I opened a spreadsheet and started mapping patterns. One number appeared frequently, always during her lunch breaks, always for calls lasting 20 to 40 minutes. The area code was local, but I didn't recognize it. I ran it through a reverse lookup service. Derek Sullivan, age 39, owner of Sullivan Fitness, a gym franchise in West Hartford. According to his business website, he had 3 locations and specialized in high-intensity interval training. His photo showed a guy with perfect teeth and arms so defined they looked like they'd been carved from marble. The kind of guy who probably spent more time looking at himself in mirrors than he did at anyone else. I stared at that photo for a long time, my fingers growing numb as I gripped the edge of my desk. Then I checked Margaret's college yearbook, which she kept on the shelf in her home office. There he was, Derek Sullivan, senior year, captain of the lacrosse team. Margaret had drawn a little heart next to his photo in pen. That's when I knew this wasn't something new. This was history repeating itself. Margaret had gone to her college reunion 6 months ago. She'd been excited about it for weeks, bought a new dress, got her hair done. I couldn't go because I had a work deadline, so she went alone. She came back Sunday night, slightly drunk, telling me all about the people she'd reconnected with. She mentioned Derek exactly once. Remember Derek Sullivan? He owns a bunch of gyms now, still looks exactly the same. I remember smiling. I remember saying something like, good for him? I'm an idiot. I spent the next 2 weeks building a case. Not for a lawyer, not yet. For myself. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I made any moves. I wasn't going to be caught off guard. I installed tracking software on her phone while she was in the shower. Nothing illegal, just one of those family safety apps that parents use to monitor their kids. She barely glanced at it before agreeing, telling me she'd heard about someone at work getting their identity stolen. The data came in like a horror movie playing in slow motion. Lunch meetings at hotels, gym sessions that lasted 3 hours. Text messages sent at 2 in the morning when she was supposedly asleep next to me. She was careful, I'll give her that. She never saved Derek's contact under his real name. He was listed as Kelly M. in her phone, probably meant to look like a female colleague, but the location data didn't lie. She was at his gym, his house, his favorite restaurants. On Valentine's Day, while I was at work, She spent 4 hours at a residence registered to Derek Sullivan. I'd bought her flowers that morning. She thanked me, kissed me, and told me she loved me. I sat in my office that afternoon, staring at the tracking app on my computer screen, watching the little blue dot that represented my wife sitting stationary at another man's house. My coworker Daniel knocked on my door frame and asked if I wanted to grab lunch. I told him I wasn't hungry. He said I looked sick. I told him I was fine. I wasn't fine. I was watching my entire life collapse in real time, rendered in GPS coordinates and cell tower triangulation. It felt like a slow-motion train wreck, and I couldn't look away. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. Margaret told me she had a work conference in Philadelphia, a 2-day seminar on crisis management. She showed me the itinerary on her laptop. It looked legitimate. She even forwarded me the hotel confirmation. The Courtyard Marriott downtown, professional rate, single room. I nodded and told her to have a safe trip. I kissed her goodbye at the door on Thursday morning and watched her drive away. Then I called in sick to work, got in my car, and followed her. She didn't go to Philadelphia. She went to the airport. I parked in the long-term lot and watched her meet Derek Sullivan at the departures terminal. He was wearing a leather jacket and carrying a duffel bag. They kissed right there in public. No quick peck, no subtle greeting. It was a full movie-style kiss that made my stomach turn. Then they walked into the terminal together, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, breathing slowly, counting to keep myself from doing something stupid. Then I went inside and checked the departure boards. Only 2 flights were leaving in the next hour, one to Atlanta, one to Miami. I gambled on Miami. It made sense for a romantic getaway. I was right. I watched them go through security from a distance, staying behind a column so Margaret wouldn't see me. They were laughing about something. Derek said something in her ear that made her swat his chest playfully. They looked happy. They looked like a couple in love. I drove home in silence. I didn't play music. I didn't call anyone. I just drove, white-knuckling the steering wheel, my mind completely blank except for one single thought that played on repeat. She's gone. She's really gone. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall for 2 hours. Then I opened my laptop and started researching divorce lawyers. I read articles about asset division, infidelity clauses, legal separation requirements in Connecticut. I took notes in a fresh document. I organized everything by priority. Margaret called me that night from Philadelphia. At least, that's what her location spoofing app was telling my phone. In reality, she was in Miami, probably drinking mojitos on a beach with Derek. She sounded cheerful, told me about the seminar, complained about the hotel food. She asked how my day was. I told her it was fine. Quiet. She said she'd be home Saturday afternoon. I told her I'd pick her up from the train station. I didn't pick her up from the train station. Instead, I spent Saturday morning meeting with a divorce attorney named Patricia Hendricks. She was in her 50s, wore a gray pantsuit, and had the kind of direct eye contact that made me feel like she could see through walls. I told her everything, showed her the evidence, the phone records, the location data, the hotel receipts I'd found in Margaret's car while she was gone. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands on her desk. Connecticut is a no-fault state, she said. The infidelity won't matter much for the divorce itself, but it will matter for asset division. How much of your marital property is in joint accounts? Most of it, I said. We have a joint checking account, joint savings, the house is in both our names. I have a separate 401k, and she has her own retirement account. Does she know you know? No. Patricia nodded slowly. Keep it that way. Don't confront her until we've secured your assets. I'll file the paperwork Monday morning, but first I need you to do exactly what I tell you. Document everything, move your money, and whatever you do, don't let her know what's coming. I left Patricia's office with a checklist and a retainer agreement. For the first time in weeks, I felt focused. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was taking action. Margaret came home Saturday afternoon with a tan and a smile. She hugged me at the door, told me she missed me, showed me photos on her phone from the seminar, stock images she'd probably pulled from the conference website. I smiled, nodded, and asked about her presentations. She talked enthusiastically about crisis management strategies while I microwaved leftover pizza. That night, she fell asleep curled against me, her head on my chest, her breathing slow and even. I stared at the ceiling, feeling nothing but a cold, spreading emptiness where my feelings for her used to be. Sunday morning, I started moving money. Carefully, methodically, in amounts small enough not to trigger any alerts. I transferred funds from our joint savings to my personal account. I liquidated some investments. I emptied our emergency fund. By Monday afternoon, I had secured $60,000 in accounts Margaret couldn't touch. Patricia filed the divorce papers Monday morning. The process server delivered them to Margaret at her office Tuesday afternoon while she was in a meeting with a client. She called me 17 times in the next hour. I ignored every call. When I finally answered, her voice was shaking. "Victor, what the hell is going on? Someone just served me divorce papers in the middle of a client presentation. Is this a joke?" "It's not a joke," I said calmly. I was in my car, parked in the lot behind my office building. "I want a divorce, Margaret. I've already moved out my things, the locks are changed, don't try to come home." "What are you talking about? Why would you—" "Victor, we need to talk about this." "We don't need to talk about anything. My attorney will be in contact. Don't call me again." I hung up. She called back immediately. I declined the call and blocked her number. Then I sat in my car and cried for the first time in 15 years. 3 days after the divorce papers were served, Margaret showed up at my new apartment. I'd rented a one-bedroom in a complex across town, a modest place, 600 square feet of beige carpet and white walls, furnished with the cheapest IKEA furniture I could find. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A temporary space, a buffer between the life I'd known and the new life I was beginning to carve out for myself. It was depressing as hell, but at least it wasn't filled with lies. Margaret must have gotten the address from someone, probably called the electric company pretending to be me. She knocked on my door at 7 in the morning, just before I was about to leave for work. I looked through the peephole and saw her standing there in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept all night. I stood there for a moment, considering whether I should open the door at all. But I did. I opened it just enough to leave the chain on. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. "To talk," she said. Her voice was tight, like she was fighting to keep it steady. "Victor, please, just let me explain." I shook my head slightly. "There's nothing to explain. I know about Derek. I've known for weeks. I have phone records, location data, hotel receipts. I watched you kiss him at the airport before you flew to Miami pretending to be in Philadelphia. I have everything I need." Her face went white. For a moment, she just stared at me, her mouth slightly open, like her brain couldn't process what I just said. Then, as if her body couldn't hold back anymore, tears started sliding down her cheeks. "You followed me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You lied to me," I said, keeping my voice even. "Repeatedly, for months." "Victor, please, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You're having an affair with your college ex-boyfriend. You've been sneaking around behind my back, using our money to fund hotel rooms and romantic getaways while I sat at home like an idiot, thinking we were happy. That's what I think, and that's what I know." She was openly crying now, mascara-free tears running down her face. "I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. It was stupid, and I was confused, and I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can work through it." "No," I said, my voice firm. "We can't. I'm done, Margaret. Sign the papers and move on with your life." I closed the door in her face. She stood outside for another 5 minutes, knocking periodically, calling my name. Eventually, she left. I watched from the window as she walked to her car, got in, and sat there for a long time, probably trying to gather her thoughts before she finally drove away. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired. The phone rang later that afternoon. It was Patricia, my lawyer, calling with an update. "She's hired a lawyer," Patricia said, her voice steady. "Some aggressive guy named Thomas Bradford. He specializes in contentious divorces. He's already sent over a counteroffer that's laughable. She wants the house, half of your retirement account, alimony, and a division of assets that would leave you with basically nothing." I exhaled slowly, rubbing my temples. "She's playing hardball." "Yeah, but she doesn't have leverage. We have proof of infidelity, proof she lied about her whereabouts multiple times, and proof she was using marital funds for the affair. Connecticut courts don't look kindly on that. We'll counter with our own proposal. No alimony, asset division weighted in your favor, and she pays her own legal fees." "Do it," I said, the words barely escaping my lips. I was calm, but inside my heart was pounding. The next move was mine, and I'd been planning it for weeks. Margaret's career had been built on reputation. She managed crises for companies that had screwed up publicly. She was the person they called when a CEO had tweeted something racist, or when a product recall threatened to tank a company's stock price. Her entire value proposition was built on trust, discretion, and credibility. I was about to destroy all three. I created a burner email account, using a VPN and a fake name. Then I sent a carefully worded anonymous email to the senior partner at Margaret's firm, attaching selected phone records, copies of hotel receipts, and a timeline of her affair. I didn't editorialize. I didn't need to. I just presented the facts and let them speak for themselves. The subject line was simple: due diligence on Margaret Wells. The email suggested that Margaret had been using company time and resources to conduct a personal affair, including billing client hours while she was actually at Derek's gym or meeting him at hotels. I had the location data to prove it. I had timestamps showing she'd logged hours on client projects while physically being nowhere near her office or any client site. It wasn't personal. It was professional suicide, delivered in 12-point Times New Roman. 2 days later, Margaret was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. I know this because she called me from a blocked number, screaming. I'd forgotten to block those. "You did this," she shouted. Her voice was raw, barely recognizable. "You sent that email to my firm. You're trying to ruin my career." "I didn't send anything," I said calmly, sitting at my desk at work, eating a turkey sandwich. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me. You're the only person who would have access to those records. Margaret, we're getting divorced. We're not supposed to be talking. Contact my attorney if you have legal questions. Otherwise, leave me alone." I hung up, blocking the number. Then I finished my sandwich and got back to work. The next phase of my plan took more time, but was equally satisfying. I started reaching out to Margaret's friends and family, not confronting them or being dramatic, just casually mentioning the divorce in conversation and letting the truth slip out naturally. I called her mother, Susan, first. I explained that Margaret and I were separating because she'd been unfaithful. Susan was horrified. Margaret had always been her golden child, the successful daughter who did everything right. Learning that Margaret had cheated shattered that image for Susan, and I could hear the disbelief in her voice as she processed it. I called Margaret's sister, Barbara, and had a similar conversation. Then I called her college roommate, the one Margaret had supposedly been visiting that first weekend. I called mutual friends from our wedding. I didn't embellish the details. I didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. Within 2 weeks, Margaret's entire social circle knew what she'd done. Her friends started taking sides, and most of them took mine. Not because they liked me more, but because infidelity is a clear-cut betrayal. There's no spinning it. No way to make yourself look good after that. Margaret tried, I'm sure. But I had gotten there first, and I had been honest. Margaret left me a voicemail from another blocked number. I saved it, but didn't listen to it until later. When I finally did, her voice was different, smaller, defeated. "Victor, please stop doing this," she said, her words breaking. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but you're destroying my life. I've lost my job, my friends won't talk to me, my family thinks I'm a monster. I get it, okay? I screwed up. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm sorry, but please, just stop. I'm begging you." I deleted the voicemail without hesitation. Blocked that number too. Derek was next. I'd been watching him peripherally while I focused on Margaret, but now it was time to shift attention. Derek Sullivan, the gym bro extraordinaire, had built his little fitness empire on image. His social media presence was all motivational quotes, shirtless workout videos, and testimonials from satisfied clients. He was a brand, and brands are fragile things. I created another burner account, this time on Instagram. I started leaving comments on his posts. Nothing threatening, nothing that would get me banned, just subtle observations. Isn't this the guy who home-wrecked a marriage? Derek Sullivan destroyed a family for an affair. Cheater and liar. Other people started noticing, asking questions. Derek tried to ignore it at first, but the comments multiplied. Some were mine from different accounts. Others were from strangers who'd seen my comments and piled on. The internet loves a villain. His gym's Yelp reviews started taking hits. 1 star. Owner has no integrity. 1 star. Supports infidelity. 1 star. Find a gym with better values. His business partners started getting nervous. Sullivan Fitness had 3 locations, all operating under franchise agreements with investors who'd put up capital. Those investors started asking questions about the negative publicity. Derek tried to spin it as lies from a jealous ex-husband, but the story was already out there, corroborated by too many sources. I didn't stop there. I found out which bank held the loans for his gym locations and sent them an anonymous tip about potential financial mismanagement, attaching doctored documents that suggested Derek had been cooking the books. Nothing illegal on my part, just enough smoke to make them investigate. The bank launched an audit. Derek's perfect little empire started cracking. I wish I could say I felt guilty. I didn't. I felt focused. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was in control. 2 months after I filed for divorce, Margaret tried to meet me in person. She sent an email through her attorney requesting a face-to-face conversation to discuss terms amicably. Patricia, my lawyer, advised against it. She said it was a trap, that Margaret was trying to manipulate me into softening my stance. But I agreed. I wanted to see her, wanted to watch her squirm as she tried to justify the mess she had created. I wanted to hear her attempt to put words to her betrayal. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Hartford. It was an early morning, the sun still low in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets. I'd been sitting in my car for a few minutes, gathering my thoughts before heading in. When I stepped through the door, I saw her right away. Margaret was already there, sitting at a corner table by the window with a cappuccino that she wasn't drinking. Her clothes hung looser than I remembered, and her face, hollowed out, drawn, was like a stranger's. The dark circles under her eyes were impossible to hide, no matter how much makeup she'd layered on. She looked thinner, smaller. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, she seemed diminished. I sat down across from her without saying hello. There was no pleasantries, no time for small talk. "Thanks for coming," she said quietly, her voice betraying her anxiety, like it was an effort to even speak. "You have 10 minutes. Talk," I said, my voice calm, but the words sharp. She took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. "Victor, I know I hurt you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But this has to stop. You're not just hurting me anymore. You're hurting yourself. All this anger, this revenge, it's eating you alive." "I'm fine," I said flatly. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sure what I felt. But the one thing I didn't feel was sadness. That was gone, replaced by a cold emptiness. "You're not fine. Look at you," she continued, her eyes scanning my face. "You've lost weight. You look exhausted. This whole thing is consuming you, and for what? To prove a point? To make me suffer?" "To make sure you face consequences," I said, my voice harder this time. "Something you've never had to do in your entire life." She flinched as if I slapped her, a physical reaction to the truth. "I lost my job, Victor," she said, her voice trembling now. "I lost my friends. My family barely speaks to me. Derek and I aren't even together anymore because you've made his life hell too. What more do you want from me?" I leaned forward slightly, my gaze unwavering. "I want you to understand what you took from me. 12 years, Margaret. 12 years of my life, of me believing we were building something real. And you threw it all away for some gym rat you dated in college. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Tears began to roll down her face again, freely now. I know, and I'm so sorry. If I could take it back, I would. I would undo all of it. But I can't. So please, just tell me what you want." "Tell me what it's going to take for this to end." I stared at her for a moment, the woman who had once been my whole world, the person I trusted more than anyone. "Sign the divorce papers," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Accept the asset division. Walk away and never contact me again." Her face crumpled as she tried to speak, her breath catching in her throat. "The asset division leaves me with almost nothing," she whispered. "I can't afford rent, Victor. I can't afford my car payment. You took everything from our accounts before I even knew what was happening." I felt a flicker of something, maybe pity, maybe just the cold satisfaction of knowing she was finally being held accountable, but I crushed it quickly. "You should have thought about that before you spent our money on hotels with Derek," I replied, my tone unyielding. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing openly now. The few other customers in the coffee shop started noticing. I didn't care. I had no sympathy left for her. "Please," she whispered through her hands, her voice barely audible. "I'm drowning here. I have nowhere to go. I'm living with my sister, sleeping on her couch. I'm applying for jobs, but no one will hire me because of the rumors. I can't keep living like this." "Then don't," I said, standing up. "Sign the papers. Move somewhere else. Start over. But you don't get to keep our life. You don't get to keep the house or the money or any of it. You burned that bridge." I made to walk away, but she grabbed my wrist, her grip desperate. "Victor, wait, please. Just listen to me for one more minute." I yanked my arm free, the movement sharp and final. "We're done, Margaret. There's nothing left to say." I walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. Behind me, I heard her crying, loud enough that people were definitely staring now. I didn't care. I didn't feel a rush of victory or triumph. I just felt empty, like I'd already won, but the prize wasn't worth it. I got into my car and drove back to my apartment. When I arrived, I didn't immediately go inside. Instead, I sat there in the parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring out through the windshield, trying to make sense of everything. But the more I tried to think, the more I felt like I was floating, detached, watching my life from a distance. I went inside, sat on my cheap IKEA couch, and just stared at the walls, the silence pressing in on me. The phone rang the next day. It was Patricia. "Good news," she said, her voice a little more cheerful than usual. Margaret signed the papers. She accepted the asset division, agreed to the terms, and waived her right to alimony. The divorce will be finalized in 60 days. She caved, Patricia continued, completely. I've never seen someone fold this fast. Whatever you said to her yesterday, it worked. I didn't say anything special, I replied, leaning back in my chair. I just told her the truth. The phone call ended, and for a moment, I just sat there. The emptiness I felt wasn't because Margaret was gone, but because of how easily she had crumbled. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel closure. I just felt nothing. A week later, Derek called me. I don't know how he got my number, probably from Margaret, but he called on a Saturday morning, his voice tight with anger. We need to talk. No, we don't, I said, my tone flat. Yes, we do, he shot back. You've been harassing me online, trashing my business, spreading lies. It needs to stop. I haven't done anything, I replied. Maybe your business is failing because you're not good at running it. Don't play dumb with me. I know it's you. The fake accounts, the bad reviews, all of it. You're obsessed with ruining me because of Margaret. Margaret made her own choices. You made yours. If people judge you for those choices, that's on you, not me. You're a coward, Derek spat. His voice was shaking now, angry and impotent. You hide behind fake profiles and anonymous emails because you're too weak to confront me face to face. If I'm such a coward, I said, why are you calling me instead of showing up at my door? Silence followed. Then Derek hung up. I blocked his number without a second thought and went back to making my morning coffee. 2 weeks later, Sullivan Fitness filed for bankruptcy. The bank audit had uncovered real financial irregularities, nothing I'd fabricated. Derek had been overstating revenues and understating expenses to impress investors. When the truth came out, the investors pulled funding. Derek's gyms closed one by one. The local news ran a story about it, complete with interviews from angry former employees who hadn't been paid their final paychecks. Derek's social media went dark. His motivational quotes disappeared. His shirtless workout videos stopped. His brand was dead. I wish I could say I felt satisfied. Instead, I just felt empty. 3 months after I filed for divorce, Margaret's scandal went public. Someone, and I genuinely don't know who, leaked the full story to a local journalist named Rachel Kim. Rachel was an investigative reporter who ran a blog called Business Ethics Uncovered, focusing on the darker sides of corporate culture and the ethical failings that often went unnoticed behind polished boardroom doors. She wrote a detailed expose titled When Crisis Managers Become the Crisis, which documented Margaret's affair, her use of company resources for personal matters, and the internal investigation that ultimately led to her termination. The article wasn't just a summary of facts. It was a carefully constructed narrative that dismantled Margaret's professional reputation piece by piece. Rachel had done her homework. She had interviewed former colleagues who spoke about Margaret's increasingly erratic schedule and her decline in work quality during the affair. She had reached out to some of Margaret's former clients, many of whom had concerns about billing irregularities and suspicious charges linked to Margaret's personal trips and meetings with Derek. The article went viral in our local area. It spread like wildfire, shared thousands of times on social media. It was picked up by regional news outlets, and soon Margaret's face was everywhere. The headlines were cruel. Disgraced public relations expert fired after affair with gym owner. Crisis manager becomes the crisis, and the one that hit hardest, Margaret Wells caught in scandal, professional reputation shattered. Margaret's professional reputation, the one she'd spent her entire career building with such careful precision, was obliterated in a single news cycle. I read the article while sitting at my desk during lunch break. My stomach was a twisted knot, but I couldn't look away. It was thorough, well-researched, and devastating. Every single detail was true, and it felt like my personal anger and disappointment had been translated into public exposure. For the first time in months, I felt the sting of satisfaction. Not from vengeance, but from justice being served. Finally, at least in the eyes of the public. Rachel had even gotten a quote from Margaret herself, obtained through email correspondence. I made mistakes in my personal life that affected my professional judgment. I take full responsibility and am working to rebuild my credibility. It was a hollow statement. It sounded rehearsed, like the kind of corporate non-apology Margaret used to write for her own clients when they had been caught doing something wrong. She had built a career on offering this kind of damage control for others, but now it was her turn. The statement wasn't going to fool anyone. It was a desperate attempt to salvage whatever was left of her reputation. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Did you see the article?" "Yes," I replied. "Did you have anything to do with it?" she asked, her tone cautious. "No," I replied. That was the truth, technically. I didn't directly contact Rachel Kim or leak the story myself, but I had created the conditions for it. I had made the information available. I had spread the details of Margaret's affair through her social circle, ensuring it reached the right ears. I had lit the match, and the fire had burned on its own. The exposé was inevitable. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't feel glee. I didn't feel rage. I felt like I was watching a slow-motion train wreck, one I had set in motion but hadn't fully anticipated. I wasn't proud of it. I didn't feel justified. I just felt numb, detached. But I couldn't deny that part of me found a bitter satisfaction in watching her fall from grace. Meanwhile, Derek's life continued to unravel in parallel. After the collapse of Sullivan Fitness, he tried to reinvent himself as a personal trainer. He posted his usual motivational quotes and workout videos, but the damage was done. His reputation was toxic, and no one wanted to hire the man who had torpedoed his own business and destroyed a marriage in the process. He posted bitter rants on social media, railing against cancel culture and false accusations, which only made him look worse. His attempts to salvage his public image only buried him deeper. Then, Derek's landlord evicted him for unpaid rent. After that, his car got repossessed. He moved back in with his parents at the age of 39. I know all this because I kept tabs on him, through mutual acquaintances and public records. I didn't actively sabotage him anymore. I didn't need to. He was self-destructing just fine on his own. But Margaret, she wasn't done with me yet. 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I came home to find a handwritten letter waiting for me in my mailbox. No return address. Just her distinctive looping handwriting on a cream-colored envelope. At first, I thought about throwing it away without opening it. I didn't owe her anything anymore. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it, the familiar scent of her perfume still clinging to the paper. The letter was 2 pages long, single-spaced. Her handwriting started out neat, but as I read, it became messier, more frantic, like she was rushing to get everything down before her thoughts slipped away. She wrote about regret, how she'd destroyed everything good in her life for a meaningless fling. She spoke about therapy, about trying to understand why she had sabotaged her own happiness. She wrote about Derek, how he'd blamed her when his business collapsed, how he'd called her worthless and pathetic before cutting off all contact. It was a pathetic plea for sympathy, a woman at the end of her rope, trying to explain her actions as though she could rationalize them. The last paragraph was simple, almost too simple. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything from you. I just want you to know that you were right. I threw away something real for something empty, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I'm sorry, Victor, for everything. I read the letter 3 times. I could almost hear her voice in the words, hear the desperation in her plea, but I wasn't moved. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was indifferent. I tore the letter into small pieces, carefully, methodically. I let the fragments fall into the trash. The words meant nothing to me anymore. They were hollow, empty, just another attempt to manipulate, another one of her apologies that meant nothing. I closed the trash can lid and walked away. The aftermath of the divorce had been long and drawn out. But I wasn't done yet, not completely. I could have confronted her. I could have tried to reach out and ask if there was anything left, but the truth was, I had moved on. I had been free of her for months now. I didn't need closure. I didn't need an apology. The only thing I needed was for her to leave me alone, to stop trying to pull me back into her mess. But I knew that for Margaret, this wasn't over. It wasn't about the affair anymore. It was about power, and she wasn't used to losing power, losing control, losing her grip on everything she once held so tightly. She had tried to win my affection back. She tried to make me care again, but I had long since stopped. The final confrontation happened on a cold November evening, 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I was leaving work late, around 8 o'clock, the fluorescent lights buzzing above me as I walked toward the parking lot. The air had turned crisp with the approaching winter, the kind of chill that made your breath visible in the night, and the wind cut through my jacket like a blade. It wasn't a bad day, just another day of mindless tasks, endless spreadsheets, and trying to ignore the fact that my life had taken a turn I'd never imagined. But as I walked, something told me this night was different. I reached my car, parked in the farthest corner of the mostly empty lot, away from the shadows cast by the dim streetlights. I just unlocked the door when I saw him, Derek. He was leaning against my car, his posture hunched, like he was waiting for something. At first, I thought it was just some kind of bizarre coincidence, but as I got closer, the dread crept in. He didn't belong there, not anymore, not in my life. He looked terrible. His once gym-perfect physique had softened around the edges. His expensive jacket, the one that used to carry the unmistakable scent of new money, was worn at the cuffs. His hair, usually immaculately styled, had grown too long and messy, falling over his forehead like he couldn't even be bothered to care anymore. He looked like a man who'd aged 5 years in 6 months, weighed down by the choices he had made, the consequences he now had to face. Derek straightened up when he saw me approach, and without preamble he said, "We need to talk." I stopped about 10 feet away from him, keeping my distance. I wasn't afraid, but I wasn't about to get close enough to let him make this any worse. "No, we don't," I said, my voice cold. "Get away from my car." Derek stood there for a moment, his jaw clenched before he spoke again, his voice flat, devoid of the bravado that had once marked his every word. "You ruined my life," he said, his eyes empty. "Everything I built, my business, my reputation, all gone because you couldn't handle your wife leaving you for someone better." I couldn't believe he had the nerve to say it. He didn't even understand. "My wife didn't leave me," I replied, my tone crisp. "She cheated on me. There's a difference." "Semantics," Derek muttered, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "The point is, you couldn't let it go. You had to destroy both of us. You had to make sure we suffered as much as you did." I crossed my arms and leaned against my car, keeping my gaze steady on him. "I made sure you faced consequences," I said. "That's different from revenge." Derek laughed, but it wasn't the cocky, arrogant laugh I remembered. It was hollow, bitter. "Is that what you tell yourself? That you're some kind of righteous crusader? You're just a pathetic, vindictive little man who couldn't stand that his wife found someone who made her happy." "If I made her so unhappy," I said, my voice sharp, "she should have divorced me before sleeping with you, but she didn't. She lied, she cheated, she humiliated me, and you helped her do it." "She was going to leave you anyway," Derek shot back, his voice rising now, the anger coming back. "The marriage was dead. We just accelerated the inevitable." "Then you should have waited," I said, my voice cutting through the wind. "But you didn't. You couldn't. Because you're an entitled narcissist who thinks he's special enough to take whatever he wants without consequences." Derek took a step toward me, closing the distance. I tensed, ready to defend myself if necessary. I wasn't a fighter, never had been. I was more of a thinker, a planner. I didn't need to fight, but I wasn't going to let him intimidate me either. "I lost everything because of you," Derek said, his voice cracking with the weight of his words. "My business, my money, my reputation. I had to move back in with my parents. Do you understand how humiliating that is?" I stared at him for a moment. My thoughts were cold, clear. "Yes," I said, the words slow, deliberate. "I do, because that's how I felt when I found out my wife was sleeping with you, humiliated, betrayed, worthless. Now you know what it feels like." Derek took another step forward, his eyes narrowing as though he was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. But I wasn't going to do anything. I wasn't going to throw the first punch. I wasn't going to stoop to his level. I didn't have to. "This isn't over," Derek said, his voice quieter now, but still simmering with anger. "You think you won? You didn't win? You just made yourself as miserable as everyone else?" "Maybe," I said, my voice steady. "But at least I'm honest about it." Derek stood there for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists, his breath coming faster now, like he was trying to hold on to whatever shred of control he had left. I thought for a second that he might swing at me, that he might snap and take out all his frustration on me in one desperate attempt to regain his shattered pride. But then, just as quickly, he deflated, all the anger drained from him in a heartbeat. "She never loved me," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Margaret. She said she did, but she didn't. She was just using me to feel young again, to feel wanted. When everything fell apart, she blamed me, said I'd pressured her, said it was my fault her life got ruined. Then she just disappeared, changed her number, blocked me everywhere. I have no idea where she is now." I stood there watching him, feeling nothing. "That's not my problem," I said flatly. Derek nodded, as if accepting that. "No," he agreed, his shoulders slumping as if a heavy weight had settled on them. "I guess it's not." And with that, he turned and started walking away, his footsteps slow and heavy on the pavement. I watched him go, his silhouette swallowed by the shadows of the night. The wind picked up, cutting through the air, but I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at the empty space where Derek had been. The parking lot was silent again, save for the distant hum of city traffic and the faint rustle of the trees swaying in the wind. I got into my car and drove home, the weight of the encounter settling into my chest like lead. I never saw Derek again after that night, but in the months that followed, his downfall continued. Sullivan Fitness filed for bankruptcy. Derek's business partners pulled out. The bank audit had uncovered actual financial mismanagement, nothing I had fabricated, but enough to sink his empire. The local news covered it in painful detail, interviewing former employees who hadn't been paid their final paychecks. Derek's social media went silent. His motivational quotes vanished. His shirtless workout videos were a thing of the past. His brand was dead. I wish I could say I felt satisfied. I wish I could say that watching Derek's world fall apart gave me the sense of justice I'd been craving. But mostly, I just felt empty. All of it, the divorce, the pain, the betrayal, the revenge, had led me to this point, and yet I found nothing fulfilling in it. I had destroyed their lives, but it hadn't restored mine. It hadn't filled the hole that Margaret had left. And now, I was left with the silence. Margaret surfaced one more time, 8 months after the divorce. I was having dinner at a restaurant downtown with a coworker. Nothing romantic, just two people grabbing food after a long day. I saw her across the room before she saw me. She was waitressing. Margaret Wells, former crisis management executive who used to bill $400 an hour, was wearing a black apron and carrying plates of food to customers. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no expensive clothes. She looked like a completely different person. She noticed me staring and froze. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the restaurant. Then she turned and disappeared into the kitchen. My coworker asked if I was okay. I said I was fine and finished my meal. When the check came, someone else delivered it. Margaret never came back out. I left a generous tip and went home. The next day, I received a final email from Margaret. She must have created a new address just to contact me. The subject line was empty. The message was short. I saw you yesterday. I didn't know if I should say hello or pretend I didn't see you. I chose to hide instead. That probably tells you everything you need to know about where I am in life right now. I'm working 3 jobs trying to rebuild: waitressing, retail, office temp work. I'm living in a studio apartment that costs more than I can afford. I don't talk to most of my family anymore. I haven't spoken to Derek in months. I'm writing this because I need you to know that you were right, about everything. I destroyed something real for something meaningless. I threw away the best thing in my life because I was selfish and stupid and thought I deserved more than what I had. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just want you to know that your revenge worked. I'm exactly where I deserve to be. You won, Victor. You won completely. I hope you find happiness someday, real happiness, not the hollow satisfaction of watching me suffer. You deserve better than this, better than what I made you into. Goodbye, Victor. Margaret. I read the email once, then I deleted it without responding. 3 weeks later, I ran into Margaret's sister Barbara at the grocery store. She told me Margaret had moved to North Carolina to start over somewhere nobody knew her story. Barbara seemed sad about it, but also resigned. She made her choices, Barbara said. Now she's living with them. I nodded and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Life moved forward in strange, quiet ways. I kept working my data analysis job. I kept living in my apartment with the cheap IKEA furniture. I started dating again, cautiously, nothing serious. I went to therapy for a while, talked through what had happened, tried to process the anger and betrayal and emptiness. My therapist asked me if I felt guilty about what I'd done to Margaret and Derek. No, I said honestly. I don't feel guilty. They earned everything that happened to them. Do you feel satisfied? She asked. I thought about it for a long time before answering. No, I don't feel satisfied either. I just feel done. And that was the truth. I wasn't happy. I wasn't vindicated. I was just finished with that chapter of my life, ready to close the book and move on to whatever came next. A year after the divorce, I got a promotion at work. Nothing dramatic, just a senior analyst position with a modest raise. I bought a better car, I moved to a nicer apartment, I started going to the gym, not to transform myself into someone I wasn't, but just to feel healthier, stronger, more in control. I went on dates with women who were kind and honest and straightforward about what they wanted. None of them became serious relationships, but that was okay. I wasn't in a hurry. For the first time in years, I was content to just exist without constantly planning, scheming, calculating my next move. Derek completely disappeared from my awareness. I stopped checking his social media, stopped monitoring his whereabouts. As far as I was concerned, he ceased to exist the moment he walked away from my car that November night. He was a footnote in my story, not a main character. Margaret haunted me more, but only in quiet moments. I'd see a woman with her hair color and think of her. I'd hear a song we used to like and remember better times. But the memories didn't hurt anymore. They were just data points, historical facts, things that happened to a different version of me. One evening, about 14 months after the divorce, I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunset when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Victor?" The voice was male, older, hesitant. "Who is this?" "It's Richard, Margaret's father." I hadn't spoken to Richard since before the divorce. He'd called me once, early on, trying to mediate between Margaret and me. I'd politely declined and asked him not to contact me again. "What do you want?" I asked. "I wanted to thank you," Richard said. His voice was heavy, tired. I know that sounds strange, but I wanted to thank you for showing us who Margaret really was. I didn't know what to say to that. Richard continued. "Susan and I, we raised her to believe she was special. We gave her everything she wanted, protected her from consequences, made excuses for her behavior. We created a monster, Victor, a selfish, entitled monster, and you're the first person who ever held her accountable." "I didn't do it for you," I said quietly. "I did it for me." "I know, but it needed to happen anyway. Margaret called us last week from North Carolina. She's working at a call center, living in a small apartment. She sounded different, humbled. Maybe for the first time in her life, she's understanding what it means to actually struggle, to face the consequences of her actions." "Good," I said. "She should understand that. Susan won't forgive her. Barbara barely speaks to her. But I've been thinking about reaching out. Not to fix things, but just to, I don't know, check on her, make sure she's okay. Is that wrong?" "That's not for me to answer," I said. "She's your daughter. You have to decide what kind of relationship you want with her." Richard was quiet for a moment. "You're a good man, Victor. You deserved better than what she did to you. I hope you found some peace." "I'm working on it," I said. "That's all any of us can do." He hung up. I sat there on my balcony for a long time, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to black, thinking about everything that had happened, everything I'd done, everything I'd lost and gained. Had I gone too far? Probably. Had Margaret and Derek suffered more than they deserved? Maybe. But the alternative was to do nothing, to let them walk away unscathed while I carried all the pain and humiliation alone. I couldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. Some people would call what I did revenge. Some would call it justice. Some would call it cruelty. I called it balancing the scales. 2 years after the divorce, I met someone. Her name was Lisa, and she was a librarian, which made me smile because it was such a stereotype. Quiet, bookish woman meets quiet, analytical man. We had coffee, then dinner, then more dinners. She knew about Margaret, about the divorce, about everything that had happened. I was honest with her from the start. I told her what I'd done, how I'd systematically destroyed my ex-wife's life. "Do you regret it?" Lisa asked. "No," I said. "Do you think less of me for it?" She considered the question carefully. "I think you were hurt, and you lashed out in the only way you knew how. I think you went further than you probably should have. But I also think she earned most of what happened to her. So no, I don't think less of you, but I do think you should make sure you're actually healed before you get into another relationship." "I am healed," I said. "Are you, or are you just numb?" That question stuck with me for weeks. Was I healed, or had I just replaced the pain with emptiness? I went back to therapy. I talked through it more deeply this time, not just the facts of what happened, but the emotions underneath. The betrayal, the humiliation, the rage, the satisfaction of watching Margaret's life crumble, the emptiness that came after. My therapist asked me what I wanted now. Not what I wanted for Margaret, not what I wanted as revenge, but what I actually wanted for my own life going forward. "I want to feel something again," I said. "Not anger, not satisfaction, just normal happiness. I want to wake up in the morning and feel like the day ahead is an opportunity instead of just something to survive." "That's a good goal," she said, "but you have to forgive yourself first." "Forgive myself for what? I didn't cheat. I didn't lie." "No, but you let the anger consume you. You let revenge become your entire purpose. You have to forgive yourself for that, for losing yourself in the need to hurt them back." I didn't want to admit she was right, but she was. It took time, more time than I expected, but slowly I started to feel human again. Started to feel like Victor Wells the person, not Victor Wells the wronged husband, or Victor Wells the architect of revenge, just Victor. A regular guy who liked data analysis and quiet evenings and good coffee. Lisa and I kept dating. It was slow and careful, and nothing like my relationship with Margaret. There was no grand passion, no dramatic gestures, just two people who enjoyed each other's company and wanted to see where it led. It was healthy. It was real. 3 years after the divorce, I sold the house Margaret and I had owned together. It had been sitting on the market for months, neither of us willing or able to buy out the other's share. Finally, we agreed to sell it and split the proceeds. I got the listing notification when it closed. My half came to $42,000 after all the fees and mortgage payoff. I put the money in savings and tried not to think about what that house had represented. The life Margaret and I were supposed to build together, the future that never happened. I never heard from Margaret again after that final email. No calls, no letters, no surprise encounters. She stayed in North Carolina, building whatever new life she could manage. I stayed in Connecticut, doing the same. Derek remained a ghost. I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved to Florida and was working construction. Someone said he'd gotten sober, that he'd had a problem with pain medication that got worse after his gyms failed. I didn't verify any of it. I didn't care. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I wondered if I'd done the right thing. Not morally right, but strategically right. Had destroying Margaret and Derek actually made me feel better? Or had it just created more pain, spreading the misery around instead of healing anything? I still don't have a good answer to that question. What I do know is this. Margaret betrayed me. Derek helped her do it. They both believed they could hurt me without consequences, that I was too weak or too passive to fight back. They were wrong. I fought back with everything I had, using the only weapons available to me. Information, exposure, systematic dismantling of everything they'd built. Did I become someone worse in the process? Maybe. Did I lose something of myself while tearing them down? Probably. But I also refused to be a victim. I refused to just accept what they did to me and move on like it didn't matter. It mattered. It mattered more than anything. 4 years after the divorce, Lisa and I moved in together. Small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was ours. She understood my need for simplicity, for control over my environment. She didn't push me to redecorate or change things. She just fit into my life naturally, easily, without drama. One evening, we were cooking dinner together when she asked me a question out of nowhere. "Do you still think about her?" "Margaret?" I asked. "Yeah, sometimes. Less than I used to. Why?" "Just wondering if you're really over it, over her." I thought about it while I chopped vegetables. I'm over her. I'm not sure I'm over what she did. Does that make sense? "Perfect sense," Lisa said. She kissed my cheek and went back to stirring the sauce. "As long as you're not still angry." "I'm not angry," I said, and I meant it. The anger had burned out years ago, replaced by something quieter. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acceptance. Margaret had made her choices. I'd made mine. We both had to live with the consequences. That was the closest thing to peace I was going to get, and I was okay with that. 5 years after the divorce, I stopped thinking about Margaret entirely. She became a historical figure, someone from my past who no longer affected my present. I didn't check for updates. I didn't wonder where she was or what she was doing. I just lived my life, day by day, building something new with Lisa. We talked about marriage, but decided against it. Neither of us needed the legal formality. We were committed without the paperwork, partners without the ceremony. It worked for us. I got another promotion at work, started managing a small team, made enough money to feel comfortable, to take vacations, to save for retirement. Normal things, boring things, good things. Sometimes I ran into people who knew Margaret, who remembered the scandal. They'd ask carefully worded questions, trying to gauge how I felt about it all. I'd give them nothing. "That was a long time ago," I'd say. "I've moved on." And I had. Not perfectly, not without scars, but I'd moved on. The last time Margaret's name came up was at a dinner party 6 years after the divorce. Someone mentioned they'd seen her on LinkedIn, working for some small marketing firm in Raleigh. She'd rebuilt her career slowly, carefully, staying away from crisis management and reputation repair. Too ironic, probably. "Did you ever talk to her again?" someone asked me. "No," I said. There was nothing left to say. "Do you hate her?" I considered the question. "No, I don't hate her. I just don't think about her anymore." That was true. Margaret had become irrelevant to my life, a footnote in my personal history. She'd hurt me terribly, and I'd hurt her back, and now we were both just living with the aftermath in our separate corners of the world. Was it a happy ending? No. Happy endings are for people who never betrayed each other in the first place. This was just an ending, final and complete and irreversible. I'd gotten my revenge. I'd made Margaret and Derek pay for what they did. I'd destroyed their lives methodically and completely, and in the process, I'd discovered something important about myself. I was capable of cruelty when pushed far enough. I was capable of sustained, calculated destruction. I was capable of becoming someone I never thought I'd be. That knowledge didn't comfort me, but it didn't scare me either. It was just a fact, like knowing I'm 5'10" or that I'm allergic to penicillin. Part of who I am. 7 years after the divorce, Lisa and I bought a house together. Small place in a quiet neighborhood, nothing extravagant. It was the first home I'd owned since selling the one Margaret and I shared. I thought it would feel strange, triggering maybe, but it just felt right. This was my house, my life, my future. On the day we moved in, I stood in the empty living room and thought about everything that had led me here. The betrayal, the rage, the revenge, the slow, painful process of rebuilding myself from the wreckage. I'd won. Margaret had lost everything, just like I'd planned. Derek had lost everything too. I'd achieved total victory. And it hadn't made me happy. It had just made me different. But different wasn't bad. Different was just different. I heard Lisa calling me from the kitchen, asking where I wanted to put the boxes. I pushed the thoughts away and went to help her. The past was the past. This was now, and now was enough. Margaret Wells, wherever she was, whoever she'd become, was no longer my concern. She'd paid for her betrayal with years of suffering and humiliation. I'd paid for my revenge with years of emptiness and darkness. We were even now. The scales were balanced, and I was free, not happy, not healed, but free. That would have to be enough. I walked through my new house, Lisa's hand in mine, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not contentment, not satisfaction, but something close. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just the absence of pain. Either way, I'd take it. The revenge was complete. The game was over, and I'd survived. Victor Wells had won.